I'd like to welcome Julie. She's at the Bassett Research Institute and is the director of the Northeast Center for Occupational Health and Safety in New York, the Center for Agricultural Medicine and Health. I've met Julie several times and we've discussed these issues in depth, and her specific interest is in exploring innovative approaches to health promotion and injury prevention. And she specializes in human behavior research and developing such interventions. So I'm very, very much interested in listening to what Julie has to say about nudge theory, which I've heard about, but I don't know if I fully understand. And we have about 25 minutes, I think, and we'll have respondents available to respond to what Julie is saying. Dr. John McNamara, Dr. Dennis O'Hora from School of Psychology, NUI Galway. And we may have Stefan van den Broek from Brussels if he can join us. But Julie, over to you, and I hope you can share your screen and share your presentation. And again, I would ask people, if a question does occur to you during the session, please put it in the chat function and we will try to deal with the questions as they arise. So if you could share your screen, Julie, we will.
Yeah, thank you for the great introduction, Pat. I'm getting a message that says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, David, over to you. We'll see if we can allow sharing. Should be okay now, Julie, if you try it again.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, yes, again, thank you, Pat, for the wonderful introduction. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about nudging. I wanted to just take a minute to thank David Meredith for his organization of this session, and also to thank the respondents who will be sharing their thoughts on nudging as well. And wanted to take a minute to call out and thank Kelly Burke-Domino from Teagasc and Stefan van den Broek from the University Catholique, who were also, they have both collaborated with myself and Dr. John McNamara on our dairy safety nudging project, which I'll talk a little bit about further on in the presentation. So to start off, let's just ask ourselves, what is wrong in this picture? And hopefully everybody can see it fairly well. If you can't, if you look in the middle of that red circle, you'll see there's an issue with a worker having left a bottle of medication with a needle sticking out of it on the floor of the barn, along with a halter and a few other pieces of equipment on the floor of the barn. So this may be things that we've all seen on farms when we do our occupational health and safety visits. And we all know this is problematic from a safety perspective, but also from a herd health perspective. So interestingly, as we talked to the owner of this farm, basically what she told us was that workers had been trained in proper disposal of sharps. She also stated that she'd given the workers many reminders about not doing this, that the needle should not be left on the floor of the barn. I think the interesting thing is when we think about problems like this, we often go to our kind of go-to safety behaviors, things like training or enforcement, which might include docking pay. But I think, you know, it's interesting because as I pointed out, the owner of this farm had stated that she had trained the workers, she'd given them many reminders, and to quote Einstein, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. So potentially more training or enforcement would not work on this problem. So given this, what are our other options for changing risky behaviors or improving safety? And so I think the answer to this question is, it kind of gets to stepping back and asking, why do injuries happen? So, I mean, there are a number of possible reasons, but one reason might be that the worker doesn't know that they're doing something dangerous, or that they don't know how to do the task safely. And so in these cases, education is an appropriate strategy. However, it's possible that the worker knows exactly how to do it safely, but completing the task in an unsafe way actually provides immediate benefits. And in that case, social marketing or nudging might be a more appropriate strategy. So to talk about nudging, I think it's best to start with thinking a little bit about something called dual process theory. So dual process theory looks at human decision making by breaking it into two basic systems that are used to make, that all humans use to make decisions. So system one thinking is really characterized by fast, automatic, intuitive decision making. It takes little time or energy, and is often emotionally based or driven by social cues. System two thinking, on the other hand, requires more effort, more energy. It involves thinking about the pros and cons of a decision. It's very conscious, and it's used when making complex decisions. So these are the two systems we usually use to make decisions on a daily basis. Now, when we look at how much time people spend in system one or system two making decisions, what we find is the majority of the time we are using system one thinking. So we're making decisions fast. We're using, we're kind of on automatic pilot. We're not really thinking about the decisions we're making. We're just making them. Whereas system two thinking, we're engaging in this type of thinking very, very rarely because it takes a lot of effort. It's interesting to note that if we're experiencing stress, if we are short on time, if we're overwhelmed, we actually spend even less time in system two and even more time in system one. So I think it's important to remember that, most of the time we're not really making thoughtful decisions. The other thing that's important to think about when thinking about nudging is that this really falls into this field of behavioral economics, and behavioral economics is a academic or field of study that joins the science of behavior and economics to try to understand how we can predict human or even institutional decision making. And nudging is really a concept within this field of behavioral economics that looks at operationalizing system one thinking. And this nudging has been immortalized in the book written by Thaler and Sunstein called Nudge. There are many other books, though, that talk about nudging. So what is a nudge? So I guess the quickest way to describe a nudge is something that operationalizes system one thinking. And as Richard Thaler nicely points out, we should never underestimate the power of inertia. That being said, we can actually harness that to our benefit, to society's benefit. So, and also I wanted to point out that nudging has been used in the field of public health for years. Popular topics that have been addressed by nudging include obesity prevention, improving people's diets, increasing the rate of organ donation, trying to get people to quit smoking. And I feature a picture here of a nudge that was implemented in a subway to get people to engage in exercise while they're waiting for their subway train to arrive. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that, as I mentioned, there's a tendency for people to engage in system one thinking, but they often do this in very specific ways. And those specific ways are often referred to as heuristics. And a heuristic is a rule of thumb, while biases, which are another thinking shortcut, refer to thinking which is often influenced by contextual factors. So an example here is the availability heuristic. And what the availability heuristic refers to is a tendency for people to make decisions with very limited information. So an example of that might be a person who smokes, and they might argue that smoking is not necessarily unhealthy because they know someone who lived to 100 and smoked 3 packs a day. So very limited sample size there, but that drives their decision to continue smoking. Another example of a thinking shortcut is salience. And salience refers to a tendency to notice things that attract our attention and to ignore information that doesn't capture our attention. And the problem there is very often we've overlooked information that can be vital to making informed decisions. And then lastly, another example of a thinking shortcut would be something called the priming effect. So the priming effect refers to the potential for prior information or environmental stimuli to affect a response or decision that immediately follows. And a good example of this, I've heard Daniel Kahneman, who's a famous nudger, speak about this. At some point, somebody did a study of judges and judicial decisions related to criminal sentencing. And what they found was that criminal sentences were often more severe on sunny days versus cloudy days. So you would think that would not affect our decision making, but very often those environmental stimuli do affect our decisions. And then lastly, there are different types of nudges. So you have nudges that are more mindful. They're referred to as type 2 nudges. Those are nudges where people are somewhat aware that they're being nudged. And then there are nudges that are more subconscious, that people are less aware that they're being nudged. And then there are some that are focused on encouraging the preferred behavior, while some focus on discouraging the non-preferred behavior. So there's not all nudges are the same. So we have a very short time to talk about nudging, and I could spend a lot of time talking about what you need to do to gather information and understand the problem before creating your nudge, but that would take quite a bit of time. But I guess I'll just say, when you're creating a nudge, you do want to spend time understanding the behavior, observing the behavior, understanding the contextual factors that influence that behavior. And then eventually you get to the point where you can start to create a nudge. And I am sharing this ABCD framework figure. It's very complicated, I understand that, but it is very helpful for aligning your behavioral problem with a potential nudging solution. And this was developed by Pelle Gunberg Hansen from the I Nudge You Institute. And I find it very useful. I use it when I'm developing nudging strategies. So basically how this works is you start at the middle of the ABCD framework and you look at the various diagnostic aspects. So things that may kind of match with the behavioral problem you're trying to change. So the behavioral problem might be a matter of willpower, people are tired, or it might be a matter of attention, people are distracted, they're overwhelmed. So there are any number of things that could be driving the behavior. So you start at the middle of the wheel and then you move outwards. So in the next concentric circle, you can see these are the diagnostic indicators that are aligned with each of those diagnostic aspects I showed you before. So for example, if your willpower is limited and you have resources that might require skills, you might want to focus on the issues related to inertia, mental taxation, cognitive dissonance, etc. And then moving out to the last outer section of the ABCD framework wheel, you can see that here are some insight strategies that could be aligned with those diagnostic aspects. So you could make it easy, you could create social expectations, or you could provide feedback. So I know that's slightly complicated, but let me just show you how we did this in our dairy safety nudging project. So what happened, we visited a dairy safety or dairy farm in upstate New York, and we asked the farmer to talk about an issue they wanted to solve. And they said one of the issues they were having was worker communication. They had lost product, the owner was frustrated, they had trained the workers to communicate, they had talked to them about changing their behavior, nothing had changed. And so they wanted us to try to use nudging to increase worker communication. So we did a lot of, we talked to the workers, we interviewed them, we did surveys, we did observation. We looked at where are places where workers could actually communicate. And what we found was that outside of the manager's office, the day shift and the night shift typically switch at that location. One of the challenges we ran into is that the workers were not always kind of changing shifts at the same time. So they may not actually run into each other, which made communication difficult. So getting back to the diagnostic aspect, we knew that the workers were tired at the end of the day. They had limited willpower. They just wanted to go home. So their attention was scarce. And so what we did was we aligned our insight strategies in a way to come up with a solution that would plan for inattention, that would make communicating easier, and in a way that would make it social. And what we came up with, is a soccer-themed cross-shift communication board. So in talking to the workers, what we found was they really enjoy playing soccer. They play soccer on the weekends and in the evenings together. And they understand the idea of a team and a team communicating, because that's what they do when they play soccer. So we created this very large cross-shift communication board, which was 6 feet by 4 feet, which I should be using meters, sorry about that, but a very large communication board that was featured outside the manager's office, where people leave work or come into work. And so the workers, all they have to do is move those, you can see in the lower right-hand corner, there are emojis and text messages that the workers can easily move on the board to report something, report nothing. And every time they report something, they can move their jersey to the message, and they get points. And at the end of the month, they get prizes for if everybody uses the board every day. So that was one solution. And then getting back to the issue with the sharps, and addressing that, we created a sharps cart, and the focus of the sharps cart was to try to make the process of using sharps disposal easier. And what we found was that the worker who was administering medications was often carrying lots of things, and so that was kind of frustrating. And so we created a cart that would have things like a place to hold the halter, a place to write down medication administration, all the tools that they need. It's all placed in one cart, and the sharps disposal container is right there, so they can wheel that up and down, and makes their work easier, but it also makes sharps disposal easier. So then I just wanted to quickly mention that there are ways to evaluate nudging interventions. Participant observation is often the easiest way to do this. You can observe how many times the person engages in the preferred behavior and how many times they engage in the non-preferred behavior. You can calculate a percent and then look at that before and after your intervention to see if that changes. You can also look at other target outcomes. For us, we looked at increased communication between workers, whether there were fewer sharps left on the barn floor, decreased injuries, but you can also look at things like product loss or less waste. So here are some resources that people can look at for more information on how to develop nudging projects or examples of nudging projects that have been used in agriculture. So I encourage you to check those out. And then again, just special thanks to our dairy safety nudging team, the staff here at the Northeast Center and NICAM, and to our funders and to the dairy farm that participated in the research. So hopefully we're good on time, but I think that's it for my presentation.
Thanks very much, Julie. And I find this subject very, very interesting. And certainly your comment there about getting a criminal sentence on a sunny day is maybe, hopefully won't be too important to a lot of us.
Terrifying, I'm sure, but yeah.
I'd also imagine if your case has been heard after a very serious case, it might you might get a lower sentence as well. But anyway, thanks very much for that. And when I look at the meds cart, I automatically think that maybe a veterinary meds cart could be developed for farmers as well, because they generally also have a lot of things to carry when they're trying to treat animals with veterinary medicines. Looking at the whole issue of instinctive reactions to making decisions and then the rational if we're all making instinctive decisions 95% of the time, you know, it does ask the question, how can we influence that? So I'd like to ask Dr. John McNamara or Dr. Dennis O'Hora to jump in and give some sort of response to Julie's presentation, please.
Great. No, thank you very much, Julie, for your excellent presentation. I know that you and Hele in particular have worked very hard researching this project. No, just and I'm delighted to be part of the project team. No, just a few thoughts. One is, I think, no matter, I think we could all agree that I think behaviour is a massive influence on health and safety. You know, and I think that is at the basis of the BeSafe project funded by our Department of Agriculture, that if we can improve behaviours, that we can improve safety. That's the first key point. Another point I have is that health and safety integrates with overall farm management. You know that you know, the two are synergistic towards each other. A third thought, I was a bit shocked with Daniel Kahneman's work, and I know he won the Nobel Prize, so I won't in any way dispute it, but you know that our rational thinking was very low at 5% there in one slide, I think. No, so I think that suggests that we have an uphill battle, dare I say it, dealing with human beings. You know, now I know that the work is at an early stage and it's at an experimental stage. So I just want to comment that I know you've made an excellent video, and thank you very much. You've put it on our web as well, but it's available for people that want more information. And I know that we have a paper, you in particular have a paper published, not published, but drafted, and that you'll be submitting it to publication soon. Yeah, so just my last thought now, you know, when I was looking through this work, it reminded me a little bit of the hierarchy of controls and Haddon's matrix, that if we can make the environment better, you know, we can cut accidents as well. But I think at the end of the day, I think 91% of farmers are self-employed, so it's back to behaviour really, that, you know, we've got the farmer is the person we need to influence.
Thanks.
So just a few thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks very much, John. And could I ask Dr. Dennis O'Hora then to maybe give his reflections on what he's heard?
Thanks very much, Pat. And Julie, I just have to say thank you very much for coming. That was a really, I just love seeing, you know, the real experiments, and it's just again, I'm always you know, when you see the solutions, they often seem so obvious after the fact, and they seem, hey, well, of course you did that. But what I want to say is, you know, to get to those simple solutions takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of that very much understanding the context as you're talking about. So notice that you're working with the farm workers in terms of speaking to them in the language that they're comfortable with. You're talking to them about the constraints of the environment, the constraints of the job, and it's coming out of that really focused in that context and context-specific intervention. And so that's why I think it's really important that we have that combination of both the behavioral scientist and the worker, the person who's the farmer in our case, who's in the context every day. They're seeing the potential sometimes for solutions that we can then you know make happen for them. So I thought that was the solutions were very interesting. I suppose I'll open maybe one can of worms for you, which is the trick. I think one of the things that's interesting and difficult, particularly in Ireland, where we've a lot of small farms, as John's alluded to. I think both cases that you had, if I'm correct, were situations where you had farm workers. So you have that traditional kind of oversight situation where commonly in an Irish farm, there may be an owner operator or a family farm where it's a little bit less like that, where you have a self-employed owner operator with very little oversight. And what do you see as being the challenges that are particular to that context? And do you have any insights you'd like to share with us?
This is a very insightful comment, and I think it's something that I have thought about quite a bit. But to answer that question, I would say, so John had mentioned we are actually working on a publication that we've drafted, and I'm really looking forward to submitting that. We're just waiting to finish the evaluation on Milk Train, which is the farm where we did the intervention. And one of the things we're going to talk about is type 2 nudges. So those are nudges that where the person really knows that they're being nudged. And the point we want to make in this paper is that it is possible to engage people in the process of developing a nudge. And so to answer your question, I think that there are ways to focus on prevention through design that the farmer can do themselves. And I'll give you a good example. At Teagasc, the Danish consultancy group in Denmark, they created a chemical dispensing station that was designed so that workers didn't have, or actually the farm owner didn't have to pick up the container. And it made dispensing the chemical much easier, and they reduced product loss. And these are things that a farm owner can do themselves to reduce their own exposure, knowing full well that when they're in a rush, they do stupid things, right? So these are things that people can easily implement themselves to nudge themselves. It is possible to do that.
Thanks very much, Julie. Before we go to any other question, and I have some questions myself, in fact, can I ask Anya Mackin-Walsh maybe to make a comment? I know Anya is a part of the BeSafe project and has wide experience in some of these issues. So Anya, if you would wish to make a few comments.
Thanks for the invitation, Pat, and indeed it was a really fascinating and interesting presentation, Julie. Thank you very much. From my perspective as a sociologist, Julie, it was one of the most qualitative type of approaches to nudging that I've come across. And I'm just vaguely familiar with the literature on nudging and with a few cases in the Irish context. But I'd like to just ask you a question, really more so than a comment. And it relates to something you've just mentioned in relation to type 2 nudging, about which I know very little. So I suppose one of the major differences between my field and principally, behavioral economics would stem from the theory of power, and the sociological theories of power attempt to understand, well, how do governments or regimes or organizations attempt to control or keep order or keep a certain minimum standard, or to ensure that, for instance, in the case of this seminar, particular standards are maintained that protect farmers in the workplace. So that very fundamental question, how do they achieve that across the board and ensure compliance? And as time has moved on, our understandings of how this can be achieved has evolved from a situation far removed from discipline and punishment type and manipulation towards more approaches that have their roots in empowerment, in knowledge, in free choice and participation. So opting in an enlightened way because people achieve consensus that this is the right thing to do. So that's just, how things have evolved, and I know that you're very familiar with that. So in relation to this type 2 nudging that you mentioned, and it seems to me from the examples you showed in your presentation that these were very sensitive interventions that were based on very careful listening to your participants and your intended users of these interventions, such as the trolleys and so on. And you were very attuned to their working environments. So in a way, it would seem to me they were almost semi-participative and not at all, we'll study you, and we'll produce a tool or a symbol to manipulate you, such as a symbol on your energy bill. So to me, your version of nudging seems to be very aligned with a co-creation approach, where you actually involve people and say, what do you think will work in your community? And with the researcher as a co-participant rather than the lead person who designs the intervention. So after that long-winded intro to my question, to what extent, Julie, with your vast knowledge of nudging, is a co-creation aspect legitimate? And do you think it's coming down the road, becoming more prominent, where we engage with people as co-participants?
Anya, another excellent question. And I think that, you know, I can speak to my own thoughts on this. I much prefer a system 2 directed nudge to one that I think there's a vast literature on this topic of type 1 nudging and whether it's ethical and paternalistic. And I do think that, you know, there is some danger in not involving people in the co-creating the solution. And so I also think that if you involve the target in creating the solution, you're likely to get a better solution. I do see that there are a lot of examples of type 2 nudging in the literature. I do, having not conducted a very systematic scan of the literature, I have seen many examples of type 2 nudging, but I do think the benefit of using type 2 nudges where people are more involved is that it is more ethical. And one of the things I did not have a chance to talk about, but when you're thinking about what approach you want to use, what nudging intervention you want to develop, one of the things you can do is you can use what's called a priority filter. And the priority filter is a way of narrowing down your options to focus on one nudging solution. And one of the things that is featured in that priority filter is, do you have access to the space where the nudge would occur? Does it kind of get to the target issue? And then is it ethical? So looking at that question of, you know, is what you're proposing to do ethical? I think that is a good thing to kind of introduce into your decision on whether to do it or not. It should be one of the criteria you use to decide how you address that problem. So I think all terrific points.
Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you, Anya, for an excellent intervention there. And I'm glad that this session has been recorded because we can listen back to it and maybe think more deeply about what's been said. There's a question in from Tom O'Dwyer, and I think it aligns with what Anya and yourself have been saying there anyway. It's how specific do you need to be in identifying the behavior that you wish to change? The two examples given were very, very specific.
You have to be very specific because what you need to do is you need to focus. The reason you need to focus so specifically is that what you're attempting to do is change the context around that decision. So instead of the person going in this direction, they go in that direction. And if you try to have a very generalized issue that you want to focus on, that context is also going to be, you know, too broad to kind of redesign the decision-making environment in the direction you want to go. And I hope that makes sense because I can't really think of a specific example off the top of my head. But I think that nudges they work best when you've really focused on a specific behavior and you've mapped the context and you really understand kind of where people go in the wrong direction and how to get them in the right direction.
I certainly look forward to looking closer at your presentation and looking at those video links. So I hope David can circulate those links to videos to everyone after the session. But something that occurs to me is that some of the, you know, basic issues that we face on a yearly basis on farms, you know, people go to work and they tend to do the same thing every day, and they just get out there, they want to get the job done. And I'm just wondering how the nudge theory can be applied to some of the big problems we have. And I really like your ABCD framework, where you look at the different determining factors, and I look closer at that after this session. But, you know, how do we nudge farmers to maybe do more planning in their work? How do we nudge farmers to, let's say, check their tractor before they start using it? How do we nudge farmers to stay off the roof? I mean, it's the death trap, but yet they do it on a whim. And how do we nudge farmers to wear a helmet when they're on their quad? I mean, these are basic things. And I really want to see how nudge theory could be used, and collaboratively with farmers. So we don't want to be bringing them, you know, we don't want to involve them in the solutions, but they're the sort of issues that I really want to see how nudge theory can actually be applied.
Yeah, well, I guess the conversation will continue.
Yeah, well,
I thought you were just going to have answers for all of those there, Julie. Wouldn't that be great? There, how to get his money's worth.
Well, even if we get one nudge theory for solving one of these problems.
I think if you look at what Julie's shown, I think these are problems because they're not easy to solve, and they require, you know, really working with the you know, farmers and in detail before you find out how to get there. And so one of the, I was reading the OECD report this morning, Julie, just again, and one of the things it says, for if you're attempting a behavioral science initiative, you need to tell people, you know, we are not the magic wand that's going to just magically change people's behavior. Behavior is difficult to change. It is for us, whether it's our health behavior, whether it's our eating behavior, and it's the same for farmers. It is hard to change our behavior. We're doing what we do because it works for us. So I just wanted to get in there and kind of lower expectations for Julie there. Even though great, you know, I really love what you're doing, but that's a little bit of a stretch for anyone.
And I think the longer the behavior has been in place, the more difficult it is to change. So John, yeah, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, no, just on wearing helmets, just some experience of our own in Moore Park Research Centre and elsewhere. Now, that there was a time when we were getting fellows to wear big heavy motorbike helmets, and you know, they were going out to collect cows, and you know, it was you know, it's a research centre, so that a lot of movement. No, but then we discovered, in inverted commas, a lightweight helmet, you know, that was easy to wear and easy to take on, put off, take off and put on, and that, you know, and hey presto, we went from maybe 10% adoption to 90% or so, something like that, you know. So maybe is that in the area of nudging? We were making it easier for them. We were giving them you know, a reasonable solution, you know, an easy to use solution. So that's just a thought on the helmet one, you know.
Yeah, just another couple of questions coming in here from Beth Dooley. Thanks very much for your presentation, Julie. On that note, you mentioned about farm owners implementing type 2 nudges that would make things easier to reduce waste. How would problems that would benefit from those types of solutions be identified by a sole operator? Or in other words, how would they realize they needed to nudge themselves?
That's a good question. Well, I think there are some problems that we do have difficulty identifying ourselves because, you know, as we have just been saying, we just do things the same way we've always done them. We don't see them as a problem because that's just the way things have always been done. And I think in those situations, it's always good to get a set of fresh eyes, you know, engage in a on-farm safety inspection by a safety specialist who can provide some input. But it might also be as simple as just getting the farm family together so that people can talk about issues and concerns they have. So it might not occur to the farm owner, but the farmer's spouse or partner might see things that they're very concerned about, that they've been concerned about for a while, and that they might be able to point that out, or siblings, or, you know, children who are working on the farm. So I think there, you know, it's just, you know, maybe just reach out to others to see what they might point out. But I also think when it comes down to it, we all kind of know the things that we're doing that we shouldn't do, but that we do anyway, like speeding on my way to work today, or, you know, checking my phone when I shouldn't be, or things like that. You know, we know when we're doing things that we shouldn't.
Yeah, thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
I know that we've just gone past 4 o'clock. Anyone that has a previous engagement, please feel free to leave, but we will continue for another 5 to 10 minutes to take a few more comments. Alistair asks, what's the main difference between the methods you've used in nudging from the much cruder reinforcement methods?
So I just want to make sure I understand that question. Do you mean enforcement?
Alistair, you can jump in there if you wish, unmute
Yeah.
and come in. Alistair, are you still there?
So just sticking up signs, sending automated texts, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, great question, Alistair. So I think the major difference is that nudging interventions are very carefully calculated. So there's a considerable amount of work that's required to really understand the factors, that the contextual factors that drive the behavior in one direction versus another. So for example, you just put up a sticker, but is that a sticker that's going to resonate with the person whose behavior you're trying to change? Are you putting the sticker in a place where they'll see it? Are you putting the sticker in a place where the behavior is actually happening? Have you thought carefully about how the sticker should be, how it should be developed to optimize optimize the graphics so the person will actually see it? Have you thought about what pictures to feature so that they will emotionally connect to the sticker? So there's just a lot of time spent thinking about, where does the behavior happen? How does the behavior happen? Who's involved in the behavior? What are they interested in? And, you know, where do we place the nudge for maximum effect?
Yeah. And association works as well. Yeah. Alma Jordan, who's with AgriKids, has said that she finds the language used to be very vague, too vague. Phrases such as should not, must try, are not assertive enough and lead to confusion. People are still shocked when told of the ages of children that are to be taken as passenger in tractors. Yeah. So is the language, you know, what type of language should we use in relation to trying these nudges? Should we be stronger, or?
Well, so nudging really attempts to get the person to engage in the behavior without really thinking about it. So, so you're not really using directives so much, or commands, or things like that. What you're trying to do is to get them to do it without having to tell them to do it.
Yeah.
So the cross-shift communication board is an excellent example. You know, the farm owner could have just put up a big sign that said, "Don't forget to communicate." But the problem there is reminders didn't work. So what we knew was that workers love soccer. They play soccer on the weekend. They understand the team concept from playing soccer, and that you have to communicate with team members. And so what we were trying to do is subconsciously draw them into communicating by creating something visual in a place where they typically, you know, cross paths, and making it, you know, fun and engaging and highly visual, so that we didn't have to have a sign that said communicate.
Okay. That's about the measure of all these comments coming in. I still feel challenged to actually apply this method. I will certainly look at the ABC framework and see if I can come up with something, and we can work on that together, maybe, and collaboratively. So, yep.
Dennis, did you have a question? I saw you had your hand up. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Julie.
Okay.
I was really interested in the soccer board, right? Because it's interesting to me because here in anyway Galway, there's someone in social marketing, and so social marketing is kind of marketing towards social goods, and so when they work with farmers sometimes, and when I was talking to them about communication projects or campaigns, they said you want to speak to people in their language. And so when I first saw the sign, I was like, "Ooh, could that be infantilizing? You know, like would they kind of not want that?" But of course, this kind of came from them, wasn't it? This was like, because obviously you wouldn't get the buy-in unless it was something that they were kind of up for, and it's like, hey, they might even think it's like a bit kiddie, but like this is part of fun. It's part, like, you know, and we're the Reds because we usually play red at the weekend, and so I think what's really interesting there is how much, particularly in a context, people can make the intervention their own, and again, this comes back to, you know, that real sense of not only knowing what levers behaviorally you might be trying to pull, but also that that these are coming from the people in the context and matter to the people in the context.
Yeah, we actually ran prototypes by the workers to get their feedback on what they wanted. So that's where that gets back to Anya's comments, which is, you know, involve the individuals in creating the nudge, and you'll probably have a much better nudge.
Okay. Thanks very much, Julie and Dennis, and for everyone's communication on this. It's certainly an interesting area that we will hopefully develop. I'd just like to hand back to David Meredith to close out the session and say any further comments that you wish to make, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Pat, and thank you to everyone, particularly Julie and our respondents today, John McNamara and Dennis O'Hora, but also Anya McInwalsh for jumping in there as well. It was a really interesting discussion. It was a great presentation, so thanks for that, Julie. From my own point of view, what I really appreciated about this particular piece of work is that it is so considered and grounded in the specific challenges. And this does go back to Tom's point earlier on, that there are very specific examples, and how specific do we have to be. And looking at that from the BeSafe project point of view, I think it points to the challenge around farm safety, that there are so many risks, there's so many different places where humans interact with the environment, and sometimes that environment is an animal, so it's completely unpredictable. And the challenge there is to, first and foremost, to have the appropriate facilities to begin with, but then to ensure that the practices around engagement with them are appropriate, in that they are safe. But we stand back even further from that, and Anya pointed to this in terms of, she had a comment there around the issue of using helmets and whether or not that presents a challenge to identity, in particular male identities. That idea of, you know, somehow wearing a helmet is not manly or not what a farmer does. So we then have this issue of culture and identity intersecting with practices and shaping practices, which then shape the environment. And that really speaks to the huge challenge that we face as we try and develop programs and interventions that are adaptable and adoptable by farmers. And I think the discussion here today has highlighted the centrality of involving farmers and others, so a multi-actor approach in pursuing that particular objective. And with that in mind, what we hope to do in September is to have our 5th webinar, and this one will be this will provide Anya McIntosh with an opportunity to present some of the work that she has been undertaking with some colleagues around the issue of control of Jonas disease, and in particular the use of a multi-actor approach to understand that and to manage it better. So we'll be providing further details on that over the coming weeks, and in September I hope to see you all again. I'd like to say once again thank you to everyone who contributed today, and to wish all of you a very nice summer, wherever you happen to be. Even if you can't go very far this year, hopefully you do get a chance to have a break. So thank you very much. Goodbye.